Okay, hi everyone, and thanks a million for coming. And again, just to reiterate what the President said, I think you're all amazing, and it's incredible just to see all the workshops you've got involved in. You're running over to everything, getting involved. It's absolutely brilliant. So, as I was introduced, my name is Rosie O'Reilly, and I have a clothing label, so I'm a fashion designer, and I'm also an artist, and I also run an organization that runs workshops. So some of you might have come over to us today. We're outside, and we're running workshops where we're teaching you about things like upcycling, which is when you take a t-shirt or a jumper that maybe has a rip in it, and instead of throwing it out, you put value to it, turn it into your own, and wear it again. So the simple thing that does is stops it going in the bin and stops it going into landfill. So I wanted to talk today. I don't have a lot of PowerPoints, I just have one image, but I'm going to throw it back to you guys because I'm going to ask you to picture a couple of things in your head. So I want to start with this picture behind me. Okay, so this picture was just something I found in the newspapers when I was looking through it about 2 weeks ago. Now this could be anywhere. Well, it could be Grafton Street, it could be the main street in Cork or Galway or Kilkenny, but it's not, it's in Turkey. And what we're looking at here, I suppose, is a man walking out of a men's shirt. We see them everywhere. But on the left-hand side, he's selling life jackets. Now, this is an unusual picture, and I don't think it's something we would see in Kilkenny or we would see in Galway. But unfortunately, it is a day in the life now in a lot of places in Turkey. Does anyone know why maybe they're selling life jackets in Turkey? Yeah. No, there's not floods, but there's floods here. Maybe that is one reason we'll be wearing life jackets. No, in Turkey, unfortunately, at the moment, there's a huge amount of migrants, and I'm sure you've heard a little bit about this in the paper. And they're fleeing places in the world that aren't okay to live in. So there's children and parents, kids like you, leaving to live in other countries. And one of the places that they have to go through is, they have to go across the water. So in Turkey, in this place, most of the shops now are selling life jackets. And I suppose if you were going to say one thing about pictures is that there's 1,000 words to every picture. And this picture for me illustrates a lot. On one level, it talks about climate change, as you pointed out. I wonder, are we going to end up with life jackets on in Ireland? Or are they going to be selling them in Grafton Street or Cork or Galway? Is that something? But it also says a lot about the people who live in Turkey and who live in Syria and live in those countries that they're fleeing from. And at the end of the day, it's in a clothing shop. It's sitting right beside suits. So this picture for me kind of introduces, I suppose, the world of clothing on one level, but also the bigger kind of issues that exist in the world today, like climate change, like conflict. And I suppose it makes me think a lot about maybe how human life is valued, in these countries. Is it valued now in the similar way that buying a shirt is, for example? So as I said, I make clothes. So these were made in Ireland, but this is part of my clothing label. And when I decided after I was finishing school, I started deciding I was going to be a fashion designer. I started flicking through a lot of the papers, magazines, and a lot of what I saw is kind of, it's everything you see. It's very tantalizing. It's really appealing. It's beautiful. And I suppose I started asking myself a lot of questions about those pictures. And I started asking really what's behind those pictures. What is really behind the fashion industry? What are behind those beautiful objects that we are consuming and that we want to buy? Whether it's an iPhone or a new shirt or whatever it is. And what I found out and what I uncovered really wasn't the story that I thought I knew in the first place. So the pictures that I saw when I Googled simple things like water use in the clothing industry were pretty harrowing. So the next picture I want to talk to you about is the first picture I saw when I decided I was going to design sustainably. So I was going to, I suppose, create green fashion or better fashion that was going to be good for the planet and good for the people who make it. So the first image I saw, if you can picture this, was a place in the middle of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and it was the largest water mass in the world. And that the picture I saw on Google Images, you can actually Google it yourself if you type in the RLC, was the water mass in 1980 and then the water mass just 5 years ago. And it was decimated. So there's only 5% of the water left. 95% of the water was gone. And then when I dug a little further, I found out that that was because the water was being used to produce cotton, which I was wearing all the time and which you guys are wearing. But unfortunately, no one was managing the water. The cotton production wasn't being managed, and the whole region, which had farmers, had fishermen, everything, was decimated. So that was kind of my first step into the world of, well, what's behind a product? What the clothes I make, what decisions do I have to make sure that I'll produce better clothes that won't affect people in Uzbekistan and won't affect people in Turkey or Bangladesh or different places. So another picture that I saw only about 3 years ago was in Bangladesh, and some of you might have read about this, and a factory collapsed. And unfortunately, Bangladesh is one of the main producers of clothing. Now, in a lot of factories, it's produced in very good conditions and very, very positive ways. But in a lot of factories, it's not. And the factories aren't in very good condition. And in this one case, the factory collapsed. And a lot of people were killed. In fact, 1,200 people were killed. And this was 2 years ago. So this image, I suppose, stuck with me of this factory that was, collapsed, but underneath the rubble I could see labels of brands that I was buying or that were on the high street. So we had Benetton, you had Gap, you had Primark, H&M, you had loads of different brands. You had Abercrombie and Fringe, and they were all producing in this factory. But I suppose this picture changed drastically after that happened, and that was mainly because of the power of the consumer and the power of the public. So what happened overnight after the factory collapsed was that over 4 million Europeans signed a petition and called brands into action. So they asked for everyone to stand up and to make a change in one of the countries that supplies. So there was a big shift in that picture. So for me, it showed a really positive change, and particularly the positive change that the public, that the consumers can do. So that really happened because people like you were casting a vote. So I suppose to talk I suppose why are pictures important? Pictures are important, I think, because really they frame a lot of things. They say so much more than sometimes words can. And I suppose as a designer, that's really important to me because every day I go into work, I have to create a picture and I have to create a new image. And really, I find that it's important that that image is something I can stand by. That vision or that image, that picture, that product is something that I can say is a good product. It's making a difference, that it has a positive impact. So that's what I decided to do as a designer. As an artist, I thought the same. And one of the big projects I embarked on in 2013 was to build a sculpture on Sandymount Strand, some of you might know it, which would communicate some issues around climate change. So I asked myself, what is it about climate change that maybe we're missing? And one of the things that struck me was that idea of a high tide. And we all know climate change exists, but do we really know what a high tide is? So I decided I'd create 3 big sculpted, they looked like telephone boxes, but inside was dye. And as the water rose and fell in the dye vat, as the water rose and fell, there was a big, I should really have a picture for this one. I'm going to make you imagine it. A big buoyant system that rose and fell. And dye that was in the dye vat dyed clothing. So what you ended up was actually the high tide marked on clothes. And what happened then on Sandymount Strand suddenly was people who walked along that beach all the time and never looked out to sea suddenly stopped and noticed the high tide. And that was the point of it. It was just to really get people to stop for 1 second. So I think when we live in cities, we can move so quickly, we sometimes forget that all these systems are around us. So something like climate change and conflict seems so far away when actually it really is on our doorstep. So I suppose to finish, I'd just like to really put it back to you guys and say that you are the visionaries and you're the people who are creating the new pictures for the future. Whether it's clothes you put on, artwork you make, things you do today, debates you have, all of those things will create a new aesthetic and a new picture for the future. And really, we need you to make that a very positive picture for the future. Thanks a million.